Finding common ground on Easter Sunday. I grew up in Marysville, a town of about 9,000 people in Northern California, and I graduated from Marysville High School in 1972. A few months ago, I received notice that our 50th high school reunion was to happen in June, a couple of months. In trying to get more information, I found they had a Facebook group. This looked encouraging until I read a comment from someone who asked the group this: "Are there any recent thoughts about changing the school mascot name from the Marysville Indians, which it has been since the 1940s, to something like the Marysville Conductors, since the town has a long history with the transcontinental railroads?" What followed were over 300 comments, with lots of vitriol and name calling not worth repeating, but a few people had something to say that I will repeat. As a Native American who graduated in 1972, I saw our team name as a source of pride, and I am still proud. Another, "We never thought about race back then," someone responding, "except every day." There was an especially thoughtful comment. I thought, well, I understand how someone may think that using the name Indians is wrong, but it wasn't intentionally offensive. On the contrary, the teams who have chosen Indians as their mascot just think of them as the best. As an aside, although there's been a lot of controversy about using Indians or Redskins as sports mascot names, they're still one of the most popular names. In fact, according to a database of active and retired school mascot names, the name Indians rate number 8, just behind Cougars, at least when it comes to high school teams. Contained in those 330 comments, I saw a microcosm of what our entire country looks and feels like. It does seem that many have lost the art of expressing opinions with kindness and respect. Luckily, most responses are actually fine, just passionate. I think it serves as a reminder that we can disagree and remain respectful. And the more immediate question for me is, do I really want to experience in person what my former classmates from 50 years ago will say when we are in the same room? When we are literally on common ground. Should I go? The Brazilian Archbishop Helder Camara famously said, "When I give food to the poor, they call me a saint. When I ask why the poor have no food, they call me a communist." But he also said, "Keep your language. Love its sounds, its modulation, its rhythm, but try to march together with men and women of different languages, remote from your own, who wish, like you, for a more just and human world." Here's a personal story. When I worked at my industry job, I traveled a lot, and Christopher became my best work friend. We would even arrange our busy work schedule so that we could travel together. We both love theater and the arts in general, museums, sightseeing. We love to talk about our families and all things outdoors. The challenge for me was that Chris was a staunch conservative Christian. And me, well, I've been a UU for a few decades now. One of the things we wound up engaging in and eventually looking forward to doing, even relishing, was discussing, arguing, cajoling, harassing, correcting, and preaching to each other about all things political. Chris saw the role of government as protecting our borders, keeping taxes low, preventing onerous environmental regulations, maintaining a strong military, making English our only language, keeping people off welfare. I saw the role of government as protecting those on the margins, protecting the environment over profits, providing health care and well-being to especially the most vulnerable, and making affordable housing available. Like two rough stones thrown into a rock tumbler, Chris and I, over the years, smoothed our rhetoric and rancor into mostly civil in what I felt thoughtful conversation. It turns out that we were both seeking how we can have a more just and human world, even though we had different visions of what that just and human world looked like. We're both climbing a mountain, the same mountain, but from a unique perspective, shaped by our upbringing and shaped by our experiences and those in our lives. To me, the most important thing we did is find common ground. And sometimes, in spite of what seemed to divide us, we learned to appreciate and be enriched by the other. William Bishop wrote a book called The Big Sort, where he writes that Americans are increasingly clustering in like-minded communities, surrounding themselves with people who think like you think. Bishop points out that this has a profound effect. When like-minded people gather, they tend to grow more extreme. His law of group polarization holds that people who agree with each other grow more enthusiastic in their beliefs and agreement. If like-minded Second Amendment advocates gather, they grow more opposed to gun control. If like-minded environmental activists gather, they grow more committed to fighting climate change. The same goes for anti-abortion groups and pro-choice folks. As geographic separation increases, ideological divisions are magnified. America is becoming extremely efficient at creating superclusters of like-minded citizens. Another personal story. My sister Gail's favorite president was Ronald Reagan until Donald Trump came along. She thinks there are too many people on welfare and millions of people don't have jobs solely because the government gives them great incentives to not work and to not try to get work. As a result, they are demoralized and not being fulfilled in life. She sees our government as an entity that ruins people's lives by teaching them that it is not necessary to stand on your own 2 feet because you have been wronged in some distant past and therefore are entitled to free food, free housing, you name it. As a result, they are doomed to a life that is no life at all. A life where drugs and alcohol soothe the anxiety of a life not worth much. And so as they age and teach their children and grandchildren how to get into the system on the dole, the spiral continues. When in 1994, the Northridge, California earthquake decimated a large swath of the San Fernando Valley, damage, by the way, that last thing I just said, I asked my sister, is this okay? And she said, that's exactly right. That's my sister. When in 1994, the Northridge, California earthquake decimated a large swath of the San Fernando Valley, damage was widespread as buildings, shopping centers, parking lots, and portions of major freeways all collapsed. This happened at 4:30 a.m. on a holiday, so only about 70 people were killed, but tens of thousands were injured. Gail heard the news that nurses and doctors were desperately needed. She called her work to take her vacation starting right away, and she got in the car and started driving to help those in need. I asked her about this. She says, well, actually, I went on a military transport, but whatever, say what you want. Years later, when the Katrina hurricane hit and everyone was watching the horror unfold on the news, Gail was buying plane tickets to Houston and renting a van, convincing fellow medical folks to join her. Gail and her husband Ernie have been married for 52 years. Her outpouring of love and generosity for their 2 daughters and their families and her siblings and Ernie's family is astounding. She and I stand on this huge continent of common ground. As I stand in awe of her wisdom and persistence and genuine caring, I love her exactly as she is. What you might be thinking, I know I am, is that it's easy to make exceptions for those who are close to us, but harder to dismiss the stranger, harder to find common ground when you're not on the same ground. I'm going to that high school reunion. I look forward to standing in the same room as those who might make me feel uncomfortable, those who might challenge my views, ruffle my feathers, make me think, finding common ground in the same room. I don't know any more than you do whether I'll feel more connected or become a better person afterwards, but I do know that saying I believe in justice, that saying I believe in justice, equity, and compassion in human relations is not enough. So off I go. The title of today's talk is Finding Common Ground on Easter Sunday. So what about Easter? In the UU World magazine article, What's a UU Family to Do on Easter? Michelle Richards acknowledges that a number of Unitarian Universalists have no problem celebrating Christmas, a holiday marking the birth of Jesus, but balk at one commemorating his resurrection, which they find contrary to their own beliefs. Therefore, most of us begin by simply seeing Easter as a spring equinox holiday. Yet Easter is the highest of Christian holy days, celebrating the resurrection of Jesus Christ, marking the beginning of Christianity in the modern world. For this Unitarian Universalist, what does Easter mean? Growing up as a child, we went to church, of which I have little recollection, but I do remember Easter. Early Sunday morning, we 4 kids lined up with our Easter baskets so we could go outside and find the eggs that the Easter bunny had hid. After we found the eggs, we got all dressed up, my brother and I with our blazers and sisters in dresses, and off to church we went. Afterwards, it was egg salad sandwiches and deviled eggs all week. And so it was with my children growing up, although we were non-churchgoers at the time when they were little. For Christians, including Christian Unitarian Universalists, a free and responsible search for truth and meaning often means finding God in one's life, finding Jesus in each other. Said another way, if you prefer, Unitarian Universalists search for truth and meaning by seeking the transcendent in our lives. For me, it means trying to listen carefully to the words used by those I love, trying to find meaning for myself in the words of this other language. I feel humbled when I read the line from the Gospel according to John, love one another, Jesus says. No one has greater love than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. I said this once to a UU friend and was reminded these Gospels were written long after Jesus' death. Biblical scholars tell us the words in the book of John were almost certainly not an exact quote. Can it be truthful without being factual? The central symbol of Christianity is a cross, a symbol of execution, a particularly cruel and painful form of execution. The word excruciating derives from crucifixion. In Jesus' time, it was used by the Romans, but not the Jews. My question is, what significance can you and I find in the story of the execution of Jesus? What can we believe? Carl Scoville says this: we can believe in the crucifixion. We can believe it because we see cruelty, greed, indifference all the time. We have seen and heard proof about torture, imprisonment, deportation, and murder. Pogroms, massacres, Holocaust. We need no theology to find the crucifixion story credible. He goes on to add that the story of Jesus is not exactly a tragedy because Jesus made a conscious choice. He knew that he was at risk, but instead of running away or trying to kill his enemies, he allows his enemies to kill him. And the next question is, can we believe in the resurrection? Again, UU minister Carl Scoville says, I believe in the resurrection because I have seen people take their religion seriously and turn around, become missionaries, defend unpopular causes, and even die with courage. And their faith was an essential part of their turning around, their metanoia, their rebirth. Scotty McLennan, in his book, Christ for Unitarian Universalists, has this to say: few UUs believe that there was a physical, photographical resuscitation of Jesus' corpse. Few Jews believe that Jesus knowingly sacrificed his life to atone for the sins of humanity, or that only by our belief in him as Lord and Savior can each of us individually be saved. But as Carl Scoville explains, the resurrection comes with the recognition that any of our lives can be transformed and begin again. The resurrection comes from Christ within us breaking forth as from the tomb, inviting us to be reborn by enacting the Christ self we had forgotten or never known. He continues, Easter is a day of great hope. We affirm the awe-inspiring cycle of life that brings renewal again and again. The dawn will always come, even after the darkest night. Again, Jesus asks, are you willing to lay down your life for your friends? In 1968, Dr. Martin Luther King wrote these words, if a man hasn't discovered something he would die for, then he isn't fit to live. Harsh words, but certainly words he lived and died by, and for him, the answer to that big question. Another personal story. My first time volunteering at the Catholic Charities Warming Center, I was afraid that I might be attacked, that I might catch a disease, that I might run away like a coward if a fight broke out. The most important bit of training that one receives is the advice on how to treat the 20 to 40 homeless folks who arrive each evening. Most are regulars, but there is often someone new. Do we treat the revolving mix of humans who walk through that door at 7 p.m. every night, 7 days a week, like dangerous criminals, like lost puppies, like lepers? Are we prison guards once they enter? The answer to that question is listed on a brochure hanging on the bulletin board. It says they are our guests and are to be treated as we would treat Jesus. A tall order that needs little explanation. Now, let's be clear, when you come into the warming center through the other door, the kitchen door, as a new volunteer, the staff and other more experienced volunteers never ask about your beliefs or lack thereof. They ask, maybe they ask where you attend church. Any answer at all will do, as they're just making conversation. What they really want to know is, will you recognize the inherent worth and dignity of each guest during their time at the center? For the first several times, I thought I was volunteering to help the homeless. I eventually discovered that the guests were helping me to understand what justice, equity, and compassion in human relations really means. After a shooting at a UU church in Knoxville, Tennessee in 2008, one of the members offered this later. Sometimes the categories of liberal and conservative don't mean too much. We just have neighbors who have a great deal in common. Common fears, common hopes, dreams, and values. Our growing political divide tears families and friends apart. We can claim to have this goal of world community, but where do we start? Now let me go back in time a little. I have one final story and then my final thoughts. On September 8th, 1776, 21-year-old Nathan Hale, who graduated from Yale University at age 18, volunteered to become a spy for the Continental Army during the Revolutionary War. He was behind British lines when he was identified and then betrayed by his cousin, according to one report. Sentenced to death by hanging, we were schooled that his final words were, "My only regret is that I have but one life to live for my country." Well, it turns out nobody wrote down what he said. Not that day, anyway. When interviewed a few days later, a British officer who was not actually present at the hanging offered up the famous line we were taught in school. Another, who claimed he was present at the gallows, reported months later what Hale said. Here's what he said. At the gallows, he made a sensible and spirited speech. Among other things, he told them they were shedding the blood of the innocent, and if he had 10,000 lives, he would lay them all down if called to it in defense of his injured, bleeding country. It turns out there's another likely possibility. During this time in our U.S. history, our U.S. history, before internet and television and movies, there was a very popular play by James Addison with the title Cato, in which Nathan Hale would most certainly have been aware of. In this play, the most famous line of the play, often discussed and written by patriots in the American Revolution of the day, goes like this. How beautiful is death when earned by virtue. Who would not be that youth? What pity is it that we can die but once to serve our country? If only one could be resurrected from the dead so as to be honored to die again for the cause they believe in. Wow. So how does this relate to us? Nathan's family lived on, and he had a nephew, also named Nathan Hale, who became a Unitarian minister. Nathan Hale had a son, Everett Hale, a Unitarian minister as well, and a prolific writer. So prolific, in fact, that his words made it into the UU hymn book, Singing the Living Tradition. He's here. Nathan Hale's great-grandnephew. Here's what he said. I am only one, but still I am one. I cannot do everything, but still I can do something. And because I cannot do everything, I will not refuse to do the something that I can do. Oops. Don't throw your books. You might be asking yourself, what can I do? The volunteer sign-up sheets are right over there. There's a cleanup at the march beginning at 12 o'clock today. You are welcome to join in. We are making and serving breakfast at the Warming Center early next Sunday morning on the 24th of April. Details are on the sign-up sheet. We have a table at the Earth Fair on the afternoon of Sunday, April 24th. We have the UU building and landscaping work scheduled for May 28th. Need lots of hands for that one. And we have a table at the Juneteenth celebration on June 18th. Take a look. Our new green sanctuary team is forming. Take a look to find out more. My closing thoughts on the subject of finding common ground on Easter Sunday, using the words of Doug Muter once again. Do I believe in the inherent worth and dignity of every person? No. I am committed to envisioning it. Together with others, I hope to imagine it so well, so convincingly, and so beautifully that the vision becomes viral and takes over the world. That's much harder than just believing the first principle is true, because truths can take care of themselves. The difficulty of our task is why Unitarian Universalists need each other. If the point of Unitarian Universalism is just to believe the principles, I could do that on my own. So once again, when asked, what do Unitarian Universalists believe? I don't like my answers or yours because it's the wrong question. We're not committed to beliefs, we're committed to visions. That's much harder. Go in peace, God bless, and amen.